So there was a hoard that came up in 1999 of the pieces on the right, the Mithridates, the 6 of Pontus types that a lot of people catalog to 120 or 63 BC. But many, like my father, because they were found, there was a huge hoard of these that came out and they were covered in encrustation. And there's other things that kind of came up with it that led him and David MacDonald to believe that they were actually issued for Brutus, or Brutus issued them for the civil war against Mark Antony and Octavian. It's been widely accepted that the cossons on the left were minted for the same reason, that they were minted by Brutus to pay Thracian mercenaries, because a lot of the Greek world were illiterate, and so they didn't know how to read, but they knew imagery. And so if you were going to pay your soldier, your soldier would get paid one of these gold coins a month to fight for you. And so they wouldn't accept Roman currency because they didn't know it. And so they issued coins that looked like coins that they would understand so that they would be accepted. And so and it's widely known that Brutus needed to build an army and to grow his army to fight in the civil wars, which he obviously lost, but he was using Thracian and other Greek mercenaries for that reason. So here's the map as it was before the war started. And you can see in red is where Brutus and Cassius was. And then you can see where Octavian, Mark Antony was, and all of the different people that were kind of fighting for the space after the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BC. And you can see, what they were having to deal with. And Italy was still being run by the Senate at the time. But I just wanted to kind of show the world, and you can see where Thrace was in comparison to where Brutus was, and how easy it was to get into the Dacia and Thrace and get mercenaries out of there because they were basically right behind them. So to kind of show the fact that Brutus did do this, if you look at the top, you'll see a coin that was issued for Brutus, and on the reverse in 54 BC, it has Brutus standing between 2 lectors. And if you look at the coson, it's pretty much the same design.
It's 4 guys and this one's 3 guys.
Right, but it still has Brutus in between them. So, and then it says coson. And it's believed, that Brutus had a lot of gold to be able to pay for the war. Some possibly from senators that were on his side that may have given him gold when he left Rome. Also, we'll get into it, but he actually, when he was still fighting under Julius Caesar, he actually helped defeat the king in Thrace and took the gold from there. So he had a lot of gold, but oddly enough, there's not a lot of gold coins that were issued by Brutus. So, we know there's a couple coins that are, but there's very few imperial gold coins issued by Brutus. And yet he had a lot of gold. And so it makes sense that he would have been issuing these coins in gold instead of imperial types to pay the mercenaries. So it kind of shows that this was a practice that was done when trying to raise an army and pay for them. So if you go to the next slide. So this is kind of what my father and David MacDonald laid out in 1999. So these are basically the points of view that were made. So the Hoard did have coins of Pharnaces of the second and a Sander. Those are the 2 coins that you see there on the right. The coins Pharnaces, they had slight wear and were generally fine condition. The Sanders were generally mint state, and 90% of the Hoard of the Lysimachus types, which are being called Mithridates, were also mint state. They also were covered in the same incrustation that these coins all had, the same incrustation, same kind of black deposit and things like that. So proved that they were actually all found together. And generally coins, when you're minting a Hoard, you can mint it based on the wear of the coins. And so because the wear was similar to the coins of a Sander, it makes more sense that they were created at the same time, which would have put it in the same time frame as Brutus in the 44 to 42 BC range. And then also the fact is that if these were coins of a Sander, he never controlled the 3 mints. There was actually 3 mints that these coins come from: Tomis, Collatus, and Istris. And a Sander never needed this much gold to pay any kind of army. And also the 3 cities that these coins come from were all coins that Brutus and Cassius had their forces were controlling. So it would make sense. And to set up a mint, all you need really is, there was lots of traveling mints at the time that traveled with the armies. And so it's not that big of a deal. deal to set up a mint. You just need your guys, and he obviously had the gold. And one of the areas, whether he had it himself or he had it from senators that were on his side at the time of the assassination, was this King Sadala II from 48 to 42 BC, who was defeated by Brutus while he was still aligned with Caesar. And the wife, I'm going to ruin her name, but it's Pulmocratia, didn't want her son to be assassinated. And so she offered all of the king's fortune to Brutus with the promise that Brutus would eventually put his son back in the throne of Thrace. So there we have an alignment, and we have reason, and we have the mints and everything else. So if you go to the next slide. Okay. So these are coins of Lysimachus that were obviously much earlier. And these are what these coins are emulating. So the coin on the top left that has a square is the coins that are now being called Mithridates VI. And you can see it's supposed to be a deified head of Alexander wearing the Zeus Ammon horn. And then you have Athena on the reverse. And you can see that it's a very crude design. So they were made quickly, which would make sense for the war scenario. They were made in the style that a lot of Greeks would understand. And they're made also to say King Lysimachus. So again, even though they're probably made 100 years later. So that's what they were emulating or copying. If you go to the next slide, we have the three mints. And you can tell the mints because in the throne of Athena, you'll see little letters. And so there's letters that represent the name of the mint. And we already explained why these mints were important, the fact that Brutus and Cassius were basically controlling these regions at the time, and the fact that Brutus needed a huge army to be able to fight against Mark Antony and Octavian, which they eventually did lose. So if you want to go to the last slide. So, that's our Brutus conclusion. A lot of people still sell these coins as Mithridates VI. We always do it as Brutus. I see a lot of companies that actually will list them one way or the other, or they'll maybe list them as Mithridates, but then in the notes will say another theory is that these are coins of Brutus for the Civil War. And so,
and none of them would be wrong.
No, none of them would be wrong. Exactly.
That's correct.
Exactly. So it's an interesting debate. This is why it's interesting. Some will probably say, oh, that's been debunked. Some people will say, yeah, that makes sense. But that's the beauty of ancient coins. And that's the reason why we can either agree or disagree.